Theodore Laurie Lawrence is one of the most complicated characters in Little Women, and his cultural and cinematic history is also complicated. More than often, the Hollywood adaptations of the book changes our perspective of the characters. In the original book that was published in 1868, Laurie is both foreign and androgynous. This is Laurie's description from Little Woman. Laurie has brown skin, curly black hair, a long nose, nice teeth, and little hands and feet. He is the same size as Jo, making him equal to her. When he asks Jo to dance, he makes a little French bow. For the 1880 edition of Little Woman, Louisa May Alcott's publisher demanded she made changes to the books. Little Woman was a huge hit and publishers want to make money. Now all of Laurie's foreign features were removed because they were not suitable for a romantic suitor. He became more handsome with no mention of the color of his skin, and he becomes taller than Jo, making him superior to her. The problem with these changes was that Louisa May Alcott herself never meant Laurie to be a romantic suitor for Jo. Quoting her own words, when she created Laurie, she gave her alter ego a brother that she never had. It is the 1880 version with a more, quote, masculine Laurie that is familiar to most people. This description of him remained in the books for nearly 100 years. When I read Little Woman as a child, my Finnish version did not have any mention of Laurie being androgynous, neither there was any mention of his skin color. The translation I read had been made in the 1920s. The last Finnish translation of Little Woman appeared in 2012, so that is when Finnish readers got to read the original description of Laurie for the first time. Little Woman has been translated into more than 50 languages. Many translations, especially the older ones, are abridged, and entire chapters can be missing. Another very important part of Laurie is that he has androgynous looks. In the famous and beloved 1933 film version of Little Woman, Douglas Montgomery plays Laurie, and he has very androgynous looks. He has quite feminine and soft features. Katharine Hepburn's Jo is close to the book Jo. She is tall with androgynous looks, and she has sharp features and a strong way to carry herself. Little Woman is a semi-biographical novel, and Jo's character is loosely based on Louisa May Alcott herself. She was a tomboy and not traditionally feminine. When it comes to Little Woman adaptations, they are model examples of adaptive attractiveness. Adaptive attractiveness refers to the way Hollywood changes the appearance of a book character, who in the story is described as anything from old to ugly, from androgynous to plain-looking, is played by an attractive actor in a film version. As we learned, the adaptive attractiveness of Laurie already started in the 19th century, in these revampings of the book. In films and TV adaptations, Jo, Laurie, and Friedrich all go through adaptive attractiveness. This does not mean that beautiful actor cannot play a character or that we should stop watching these movies. Some of them are the best adaptations of Little Woman. The reason for this is the same as with Louisa May Alcott's publisher changing Laurie's looks to make money. Studios invest a great deal of money in films, and the best way to make profit and get viewers is to hire attractive actors. However, there are lots of problems with adaptive attractiveness, especially in Little Woman. Louisa May Alcott's original description of the three characters, Jo, Laurie, and Friedrich, are a big part of the narrative. Adaptive attractiveness is a deeply rooted idea in our culture, starting from fairy tales, which follow the Hollywood narrative that love only belongs to the young and attractive. When Little Woman appeared, it became a massive hit, and it made Louisa May Alcott a billionaire. When young girls came to visit her, they often left disappointed because they were expecting to see young and beautiful Jo March. Instead, they saw Louisa, who was rather plain looking. Sometimes she even opened the door dressed up as a maid, and she said to the young fans of Jo March that Miss Alcott was not at home, an effective way to get rid of fans. Jo is not written to be beautiful, so why did these readers think that Louisa was beautiful? I have no idea. Here's a quote from Little Woman fan Jimena Scotto. Louisa describes Laurie as curly black hair, brown skin, big black eyes, handsome nose, fine teeth, small hands and feet taller than Jo. Yet in all adaptations, except the 80s anime, Laurie has been represented as a white character. It doesn't surprise me that up until the 70s that was the case. However, the 2017 miniseries, the 2018 modern adaptation, and the 2019 movie make the same mistake. They whitewashed Laurie. I am conflicted in using the word mistake, cause that implies that they honestly didn't know, but since they swear they love the book, then it seems more of a conscious decision. To me, it was very worrying that almost no one discussed this in the media during the 2019 press tour. But the brown-skinned Laurie is not just about sticking to Louisa's description of the character. It goes much deeper. It is a matter of representation. One problem that period drama set in Europe or the United States has is that there is little diversity, which makes sense because they were slaving black people and discriminating against everyone who wasn't white and Christian. If today a show wants to add more variety to their cast, they normally have to race-bend characters or create a fantasy world like Bridgerton. Thank you so much for sharing my love for Little Woman. All the transcriptions of the Little Woman podcast are now available as paperbacks, ebooks, and as audiobooks on Amazon, Kindle, Nook, and bookstores. You can find all the links from the description. And now, back to the show. That all people of color get to play the servants, or the poor people, or the foreigners who appear in the background. Yet here we have an 1868 book set in the Civil War that features a brown-skinned character. And it is not just a side character. He is prominent, he is part of the main characters. He has an arc as important as the main white family. The fact that Laurie is brown-skinned plays into his identity issues. Just because the North was against slavery doesn't mean that they weren't deeply racist. Bronson Alcott got into a lot of trouble for offering education to white and black children in the same classroom. For all the praise that Greta Gerwig's movie got, I am surprised very few people called her for including only a couple of black characters. There was one lady who barely had a line and another one at Meg's wedding who is there just for background. That is tokenism. Even the modern adaptation, which should have had no problem getting a diverse cast, chose to cast Lucas Grabeel. Then there is the matter of his Italian heritage. A couple of times Laurie thinks about his Italian heritage, and not in a good light. His mother must have been the one who passed him his skin color. When he is in Valrosa with Amy, he thinks his Italian side brings out the superstition aspect in him. Italians have always had a negative stereotype in Western Europe and the United States. I don't know how difficult it must have been for Laurie to hear all these negative comments that attack his mother. This will also serve the discussion of immigrants in the 19th century America alongside Frederick's character. Moreover, Italy is also a prominent Catholic country. A few articles I have read say that Protestant America rejected Catholicism, even to the point of forbidding it. Let's remember Aunt March's French Catholic maid who changed her name from Estelle to Esther so that it would sound more American. This is under the condition that the old lady wouldn't ask her to change religion. Even with all of these issues, he is in possession of power. He is the heir to one of Concord's biggest fortunes. He gets to go to college. He is destined to run one of the greatest companies in Massachusetts. Amy even teased him because Fred was richer than him, like it was something that didn't happen often. So his wealth must have been pretty big. Returning to the March family, it will also serve to prove with their actions how anti-racism they were, not just anti-slavery. They included this boy as part of their family almost instantly. He becomes Joe's best friend and Amy's husband. It is in the book that a lot of mothers look at him as an attractive suitor for their daughters, but I am sure some other inhabitants look down on him for being Italian and brown-skinned. So, my point is, representation matters. Imagine how much this would mean for brown-skinned boys, mixed-race boys and parents of those kids to see this character properly cast. I am curious how many people knew that Laurie is supposed to be brown-skinned. End quote. Laurie in the book is a complex character with both good and bad qualities. He is an orphan living together with his distant grandfather. Laurie was an aspiring pianist. He had no problems becoming best friends with the 4 girls next door. He put snow on Meg's ankle, saved Amy from drowning, and was Joe's BFF. That is what we usually see in the movies. But in the books, Laurie is a much more complicated character. Louisa was ahead of her time. She refused to impose any gender stereotypes on any of her characters. In the 19th century context, Laurie and his love for music can be seen as a more effeminate trait. Even the way he is lonely in the big old mansion follows the narrative of the 19th century, when young women were domesticated and shut down from social life. In one of my favorite chapters in Little Woman, Camp Lawrence, Laurie is compared to a Colt, a gun that can go off at any given minute. Colt also refers to an untamed horse. At the beginning of Little Woman, Joe is also referred to a colt. In many ways, the 1933 film is loyal to the books, but it shows the characters throughout the 1930s lens. This happens with every Little Woman film. They are always bound to their time. Both Jo and Laurie tend to lack the aggressive outburst they have in the books. He has a bit of a temper in the 1933 film and in the 1949 version. In the 1949 version, Laurie, played by Peter Lawford, is one of the more idealized Laurie. He has run away from school, lied his age to get into the army, where he got wounded, but we cannot see any wounds. He is also extremely kind and charming. The film does not show Laurie's and Amy's time together in Europe at all. Little Woman fan Dana Parra has criticized Laurie's casting choices. I think another issue I have with Gerwig's film, and any film with fans that do this, is how the cast is put upon a pedestal. There are fans of the fandom, and there are fans of the actors and the director. I feel that Gerwig's film suffers from fans that love either her or her work or the cast and know little about the original story. And I feel Laurie is a prime example of having fans that love his actor and not the original character. Timothée Chalamet is a popular upcoming actor. I haven't seen him in much, so I couldn't tell you how good or of an actor he is, but I know he has a fan base, and I know that fan base saw Little Woman for him, not just because they wanted to see the movie, and we all do that with our favorite actors. When Joe refuses Laurie, because of this fan base, you have to wonder, are they mad that Joe didn't end up with Laurie, or are they mad that Joe refused Timothée Chalamet? because that is a huge difference, and those are the fans that don't care about the original story. They are just mad that their favorite didn't get what they wanted. You could say the same with Peter Lawford too, and Christian Bale, because you know that the studios are going to try to put some heartthrob into the role of Laurie to appeal to the love story or to make the movie into more of a love story than a coming-of-age movie. Here's a quote from my friend, Little Woman blogger, that Vermilion Flycatcher. Why Jo and Laurie don't end up together, or why our expectations of tropes set us up for disappointment. We are used to seeing literature for women as romances or epic fantasies. Not that there is anything wrong with any of those genres, but this perspective sets us up to expect and assume some things. For example, we expect the main couple in the novel to be introduced to us in the first few chapters, usually via some kind of meet cute or meet ugly. But Little Woman isn't a romance novel. It features love and marriage, but romance is not the core of the story. We read chapter 3, where Jo and Laurie meet, and we read it as a meet cute. It never crosses our mind to expect a meet ugly between Laurie and Meg. For example, Meg is not the protagonist, and Jo thinks of an arrangement between Meg and Laurie. Little Woman is a strange story if you think of it as a romance, because the protagonist marries a character that appears well into book 2, but this is not a problem because it is not a romance. An alternative reading is The Adventure Quest. The heroine is different, has a new worldview, and engages in a quest to change her world, but Jo isn't the heroine in this way. If there are two defining characteristics of Jo's character, those are her anger and her fear of change. She doesn't want Meg to marry Mr. Brooke, not because she thinks that marriage is a constricting future for Meg, but because it would mean change in her family. Meg would no longer live with them, the family dynamics would be different, and the mere idea terrifies Jo. Jo's quest doesn't fail because there was no quest. Little Woman isn't an adventure novel either. It is, as many people like to point out, but frequently seem to overlook, the consequences of a semi-biographical novel. It is the life story of 4 sisters, a slice of life with everything it brings, love and romance, and some adventures, yes, but the simplicity of everyday life, pain, loss, friendship, family, work, talent, and virtues. Let's explore the history of Louisa May Alcott a little bit. Louisa May Alcott was born on the 29th of November in 1831. Her mother Abigail was one of the first social workers in the US. Her father Bronson was a religious reformer, educator, and one of the leading figures in New England's transcendentalist movement. Louisa had 3 sisters, Anna, Lizzie, and May. From a very young age, Louisa was introduced to the intellectual circles of the time, likes of Margaret Fuller, Henry David Thoreau, Nathaniel Hawthorne, and Ralph Waldo Emerson. Many of Louisa's family members and friends were abolitionists, suffragettes, and women rights activists. Louisa's father was a controversial figure already during his lifetime, but some of his more respectable aspects were that he wanted his daughters to have a proper education. The marriage between Abba and Bronson was at times quite stormy and argumentative. Often Bronson would refuse to look for work and put his highly spiritual ideas before his own family. Louisa's childhood was way less idyllic than Jo's. From very early on, she started to support her family with her writings. In the 19th century context, the role of the provider was seen as more masculine. There were times when Alcotts lived in extreme poverty. Louisa's love and dedication for her mother Abba was fierce and protective, the same way as the Marches. The Alcotts went through a hard time together. In the 19th century, puberty began much later on than nowadays. Part of Louisa's youth was time spent in Fruitlands, a spiritual community based on transcendentalist ideas started by Alcott and John Slane. Some of the rules in Fruitlands was to follow a strict vegetarian diet. Also coffee, tea, milk, alcoholic drinks and warm bath water were banned. Many Alcott scholars believed that the low nutrition might have also affected Louisa's hormonal balance. As much as we idolized Jo, she was drowning in internalized misogyny. Jo and Laurie were brothers. They planned to run away together. They had good time making pranks, and they made fun of the feminine girls Laurie used to flirt with in college. One of the best examples of internalized misogyny is in chapter 21. Laurie makes mischief and Jo makes peace. In this chapter, Laurie pretends to be his tutor, John Brooke, and he sends letters to Meg in his name, who he knows Brooke has feelings for. Quote, "She was quite right, for the mischief-loving lad no sooner suspected a mystery than he set himself to find it out, led Jo a trying life of it. He wheedled, bribed, ridiculed, threatened and scolded, affected indifference, that he might surprise the truth from her, declared her new, then that he didn't care, and at last, by dint of perseverance, he satisfied himself that it concerned Meg and Mr. Brooke, feeling indignant that he was not taken into his tutor's confidence. He set his wits to work to devise some proper retaliation for the slight. Jo's reactions throughout the chapter, however, has annoyed plenty of contemporary readers, and so have Laurie's actions. Jo's first reaction is to beat up Laurie and defend Meg's honor. "Oh, the little villain! That's the way he meant to pay me for keeping my word to mother. I'll give him a hearty scolding and bring him over to beg pardon," cried Jo, burning to execute immediate justice, but her mother held her back, saying, with a look she seldom wore, seeing Meg's usually gentle temper was roused and her pride hurt by this mischievous joke, Mrs. March soothed her with promises of entire silence and great discretion for the future. The instant Laurie's step was heard in the hall, Meg fled into the study, and Mrs. March received the culprit alone. Jo had not told him why he was wanted, fearing he wouldn't come, but he knew the minute he saw Mrs. March's face, and stood twirling his hat with a guilty air which convicted him at once. Jo was dismissed, but chose to march up and down the hall like a sentinel, having some fear that the prisoner might bolt. The sound of voices in the parlour rose and fell for half an hour, but what happened during that interview the girls never knew. When they were called in, Laurie was standing by their mother with such penitent face that Jo forgave him on the spot, but did not think it wise to betray the fact. Meg received his humble apology and was much comforted by the assurance that Brooke knew nothing of the joke. Jo stood aloof, meanwhile trying to harden her heart against him, and succeedingly only in priming up her face into an expression of entire disapprobation. Laurie looked at her once or twice, but as she showed no sign of relenting, he felt injured and turned his back on her till the others were done with him, when he made her a low bow and walked off without a word. As soon as he had gone, she wished she had been more forgiving, and when Meg and her mother went upstairs, she felt lonely and longed for Teddy. After resisting for some time, she yielded to the impulse and, armed with a book return, went over to the big house. When Laurie is scolded by Mommy, Jo quickly forgives him and sees the whole thing only as a harmless prank. She has difficulties understanding how much Laurie's mischief hurt her sister. This is what Meg says: "If John doesn't know anything about this nonsense, don't tell him, and make Jo and Laurie hold their tongues. I won't be deceived and plagued and made a fool. It is a shame. Meg is in an age where if this prank would have turned into a rumor, it would have severely hurt Meg's reputation, and John's as well. Meg's response is very mature. Considering the time, there is very little that Meg can do when something like this happens. Back at the Lawrences, Laurie is lectured by his grandfather. No, he would have the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. I'd have told my part of the scrape, if I could without bringing Meg in. As I couldn't, I held my tongue and bore the scolding till the old gentleman collared me. Then I bolted, for fear I should forget myself. It was nice, but he is sorry, I know, so go down and make up. I will help you. Hanged if I do. I am not going to be lectured and pummeled by everyone, just for a bit of frolic. I was sorry about Meg and begged pardon like a man, but I won't do it again when I wasn't in the wrong. He didn't know that. He ought to trust me and not act as if I was a baby. It is no use, Jo. He's got to learn that I am able to take care of myself and don't need anyone's apron strings to hold on by. Jo works as a mediator between Laurie and the older Mr. Lawrence. After being forced to apologize to Meg, Laurie is now expecting his grandfather to apologize to him for lecturing him without no reason. He refuses to see any faults in his actions. The next moment he is asking Jo to go to Washington to see Mr. Brooke, and Jo is tempted, but she is mature enough to see that such trip is Laurie only trying to escape facing his grandfather. There is of course an actual reason why Laurie and his grandfather's relationship is difficult, and why he is constantly looking for attention, but that does not justify his actions. Mr. Lawrence's ruddy face changed suddenly, and he sat down, with a troubled glance at the picture of a handsome man, which hung over his table. It was Laurie's father, who had run away in his youth, and married against the imperious old man's will. Jo fancied her, remembered and regretted the past, and she wished she had held her tongue. One thing I have noticed while doing gender studies on Little Women characters and talking to fans across the world is that this chapter is more than often ignored, and the focus isn't on the prank that Laurie makes on Meg, but it is on Laurie's and Jo's conversation. Why didn't Jo just agree to go with Laurie to Washington and have fun? Nothing bad happens as long as Jo is happy. One fan I chatted with said, "Why to care since no one is hurt?" What about Meg? For many, Meg seems to be a less valid person in the story than Jo is. Jo forgives Laurie, so aren't we obliged to forgive Laurie as well? In her analysis on this very same chapter, Jan Albertini brings out many of the similar themes I have presented here. No matter how much time Laurie spends with Jo, her sisters, or Marmee, Laurie lives in a man's world, and so do the women, whether grown or little. Jo's reaction can feel almost as violating as Laurie's actions, because Jo is the protagonist, and even though she is participating to cover up Laurie's behavior, she does not question it, unlike Marmee and Meg. The idealization of both Jo and Laurie is so deeply rooted in our culture. This chapter has never been adapted into any of the movies. Chapter captures both Jo's and Laurie's fast mood changes and their parallel tempers. We also see that Meg is a very strong person. In this case, a lot more feminist than Jo, whose growth process is only beginning. This is a quote from a Jo drama march. At the risk of alienating my fellow Louisa May Alcott enthusiasts and schoolers, one of my students has urged me to be thoughtful about the following. Would Theodore Laurie Lawrence be lauded for his actions and behavior by modern standards, or would he be censored? I am always hesitant to evaluate the actions of a literature character written over a century ago through the lenses of the present. But I do feel it is a question that merits discussion. I am deeply respectful of Louisa May Alcott, her exceptional work, and her remarkable life, but the boys will be boys latitude that Laurie's character is given strikes me as odious at several moments throughout Little Woman. End quote. Jo does have internalized misogyny. Sometimes she wishes that she could be a man and not a woman, and identifies more with men, at least at the beginning of the novel, and then slowly begins to find the balance between the masculine and the feminine. Other than her mother and her sisters, she doesn't seem to enjoy the company of other women. At the end of the novel, when Fredrik comes courting, the narrator says that Jo forgot to compare him to Laurie, who had been her model of masculinity. When she gets into a relationship with Fredrik, she begins to treat other women with more respect because he does. The same happens with Laurie in his relationship with Amy. He becomes a lot more considerate of the other people around him, and he even apologizes to Jo at the end of the novel about the way he behaved towards her. That is never in the Little Woman films, because Laurie's character arc has never been adapted, not fully. When Jo and Laurie grow up, he takes a role that is almost overly masculine. He low-key tries to encourage her to flirt with him, and then he threatens to kill himself if Jo does not marry him. This breaks Jo's ideas of masculinity the way she knew them. In the book, Jo travels to New York because she gets anxious to be alone with Laurie. Nothing sweet or romantic about that. She even says to Mommy that she needs to leave because she does not like him in that way. And then in New York, she opens her heart to Fredrik, and Laurie proposes after Jo has returned. In the movies, Laurie proposes before she goes to New York. So you will never get the real reason why Jo rejected him. She was in love with Fredrik. When Louisa May Alcott wrote Little Woman, there was discrimination against both German and Italian immigrants. Laurie first becomes friends with the Marches, who represent Louisa's transcendentalist philosophy of the transnational family. But because Laurie comes from a wealthy family, he does not face the same level of discrimination as Fredrik's character does. There has been lots of criticism towards Little Woman adaptations because they do not include immigration themes, and in some cases they even make fun of them. Throughout the whole promotional tour of the 2019 film, Greta Gerwig complained about Fredrik being German and speaking with a German accent. Louisa May Alcott adored everything that came from Germany and even studied German herself. This is another quote from That Vermilion Flycatcher. How the film and TV adaptations of Little Woman consistently ignore the fact that Laurie is described as tall and dark, brown skin with black eyes and black curly hair. It isn't just about representation, though it is important, but about who Laurie is as a character, why he is the way he is, and how his relationship with his grandfather is the way it is. Laurie's physical appearance tells us that he is half Italian, and that he looks Italian, and Louisa May Alcott makes a point emphasizing that. This is what Jo says in Little Woman. How I wish I was going to college. You don't look as if you like it. I hate it. Nothing but grinding or skylarking, and I don't like the way fellows do either in this country. What do you like? To live in Italy, and to enjoy myself in any way. And this is from another chapter. That is why he has such handsome black eyes and pretty manners. Italians are always so nice, said Meg, who was a little sentimental. He looked like an Italian, was dressed like an Englishman, and had an independent air of an American. For the Italian part of his nature, there was a touch of superstition. The pair roses Amy gave him were sort of Italian, laid in their dead hands. never in bridal wreaths, and for the moment he wondered if the omen was for Jo or himself. And this is a quote about Amy. She watched him for a moment with artistic pleasure, thinking how like Italian he looked, as he lay basking in the sun with an uncovered head and eyes full of sudden dreaminess, for he seemed to have forgotten her and fallen into a reverie. An explanation as to why this is important can be found in Marmie's explanation. "Mother, why didn't Mr. Lawrence like to have Laurie play?" asked Jo, who was in inquiring disposition. "I am not sure, but I think it is because his son, Laurie's father, married an Italian lady, a musician, which displeased the very proud old man. The lady was good and lovely and accomplished, but he did not like her, and never saw his son after he married. They both died when Laurie was a little child, and then his grandfather took him home. I fancy the boy, who was born in Italy, is not very strong, and the old man is afraid of losing him, which made him so careful. Laurie comes naturally from his love for music, for he is like his mother, and I dare say his grandfather fears that he may want to be a musician. At any rate, his skill reminds him of the woman he did not like, and so he glowered, as Jo said. Laurie is an orphan who lost his parents at an early age. Mr. Lawrence, who had cut ties with his son, learns that his son has died before they could get reconciled, and that he had a grandchild he had to take care of from then onwards. As he doesn't know what to do, he keeps Laurie in Europe, attending school there. Laurie was practically an institutionalized child. Mr. Lawrence finally hires a tutor for Laurie and brings him home to live with him. By the start of the novel, they have known each other for a very short time. Laurie wants to go back to Europe to treat his roots, to be in the place to which he, by temper and looks, feels like he belongs. Laurie's appearance is a constant reminder that he doesn't quite fit in Concord society, and this only changes when the Marches make him one of their own. That is why he has a mother-son relationship with Marmee. That is one of the reasons why he is so dejected when Jo refuses him. That is why he is so lousy at college. Mr. Lawrence, on his side, is terrified of losing Laurie the same way he has lost both of his children. Both musically inclined, as was Laurie's mother, of whom Laurie bears the resemblance, and one can suppose his wife, at a young age. It is no wonder that he doesn't want Laurie to play or dedicate himself to music. It is only his story arc with Beth that helps him recover from his aversion to music, and it is in this light how important for him as a character is his offer to Laurie, after the failed proposal to go to Europe with him, try his art and enjoy himself. Mr. Lawrence wants to be there for his grandson and correct somehow what he didn't do for his son. Laurie isn't just a standard boy next door, he is a character in his own right that cannot be understood properly unless his background is taken into account, because it significantly shapes his temper and the way he relates to other characters in the novel. That is why he needs to be played by an actor who has dark skin, black eyes, and curly hair. End quote. To give you some context, Louisa May Alcott also emphasizes Friedrich being German. Quote, being a German, he loved these simple domestic festivals and encouraged them with all of his heart, for they made home so pleasant that the boys did not care to go elsewhere for fun. When Friedrich's nephew Emil returns from his sea voyage, he, quote, kissed all the women and shook hands with all the men except his uncle. Him he embraced in the good old German style. And this is about Jo's and Friedrich's son. Standing next to his father at the head of the table, folded his hands, reverently bent his own curly head, and softly repeated a short grace in the devout German fashion, which Mr. Bear loved and taught his little son to honor. Those were some of my thoughts and the thoughts of my listeners about Laurie's Italian heritage and his brown skin. We would like to hear your thoughts as well, and feel free to leave them on the comments. Thank you so much for listening. Take care and make good choices.